here at Greenwich, but now teaches in the United States at Pacifica Graduate University, I believe. So while I get the PowerPoint, if you'd like to just start, that would be great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Susan.
Okay, well, thanks very much. It's lovely to see people and to have a kind of foothold in Greenwich, of which I have many happy memories. So there's 2 points to what I'm going to say. One is that I'm reminding this group of this thing that I've published on called Jungian arts-based research. And folk may know about arts-based research because it's something that's been going in universities for getting on for 30 years. It began in the 1990s, and it's basically the idea that the kinds of creative processes that go into making art can and should be included in doing academic research. And this is quite a big deal because it actually amounts to a new research paradigm. So that's one thing that I'm going to talk briefly about. The other is to present the latest results of my Jungian arts-based research, which turned out to be a story about America and the founding of America, and how we might be thinking about origin stories and stories of what the Jungians call personal myth, the ways in which we make our identity in the context of 21st century America, looking back to America's origins. So if you can see this first slide, you can see that the novel that was published last week.
Can you see the slides, by the way?
Yes.
We can see them, Justine, but you might want to go to slideshow.
Yes.
Slideshow.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, but I can't see them. Sorry about that.
Well, don't worry. See if you can. You're on the first slide. I'll tell you when to go to the second.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Alchemy Fire Murder is the result of my Jungian arts-based research, and it's Jungian arts-based research has 4.
I've got them now. Yeah.
Perfect. The simplest way to explain what Jungian arts-based research is and how to do it is what I'm calling the 4 Ps. That's P for Peter. They are paradigm, that I've mentioned, preparation, and all research requires preparation, process, which is what Jungian arts-based research is big about because it uses the creativity and spontaneity of the psyche, and projectio, which is how you make meanings for the research and how and where the research goes into the world. So this is a second story in a murder mystery book series. And like other series, it's about the same detective, but in this case I have 3 detectives and they correspond mythically to the triple goddess. So I have a maiden, a matron, and a crone, an older woman, a middle-aged woman, and a young woman. Now the guy you can see here is somebody who was important in the colonial period in America. So he's a real historical figure. His name is John Winthrop Jr. And he's really the catalyst for this murder mystery, because John Winthrop Jr. Emigrated to the United States in the 17th century. He was an alchemist. He was a practicing alchemist in the 17th century, and his aim in emigrating to colonial Connecticut was to set up a kind of alchemy colony, and he wanted to get other alchemists from Europe to join him in the United States. He didn't succeed in doing that, but he did do alchemy in the colony. He also became governor of Connecticut in the latter part of the 1750s to the 1770s. He was a well-loved governor, not least because his particular alchemy enabled him to make medicines, and he was the chief maker of medicines for the entire colony of Connecticut for many years, and these medicines were alchemical. Now, as I've said, America didn't take to alchemy, but there is something very interesting here, which is that the kinds of ideas that Winthrop was doing and enacting in colonial Connecticut were actually very close to Native American spirituality. So while this was a point at the beginning of Native Americans being chucked off their land, and all the kind of horrible things that was done to them, there was a lost opportunity here, because the spirituality of alchemy, which includes this idea of the anima mundi, or the world's spirit, is quite similar to the Native Americans who believed in a great spirit. So that there is a kind of lost opportunity in this very early history of America for a different kind of relationship between the culture of Europe that was obviously very Christian dominated, but included alchemy, and the Native American mythologies and religions and tribes that had this notion of the Great Spirit. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So I just want to say quickly that Jungian arts-based research is something new. It is not art psychotherapy. It overlaps, but it's not. It is not art done as a result of therapy. It's not necessarily anything to do with therapy. It's not art done to illustrate Jungian ideas. It's not anti-intellect, but it decenters the intellect in research. Jungian arts-based research is proper research. It is part of the existing arts-based research in the social sciences. It is part of a new paradigm, alongside and separate from the paradigm of science and the paradigm of social science. And it is taking the unconscious, the bodily, the non-rational, creative knowing into knowledge making. Next slide. Yes, so Jungian arts-based research is doing therapy with the world. That what happens and what makes it exciting is, whereas you can set up research that you have an intention to research something, stuff comes up in the process that you did not foresee, and that is often something that connects to some kind of big issue out there. Next slide. Okay, now if you click a cursor, Justine, we should get some more words on here. Great. So here we have my paradigm, my 4 Ps, my paradigm, preparation, process, and projectio. If you click again, yeah. And these are 4 ways of making meaning, which I've taken from some of the arts-based research literature, this by Rowling Jr., whose primer is published in 2013. He says there are 4 types of arts-based research. I'm saying these are actually 4 ways of making meaning. So we won't linger on this for now. Next slide. So this is why arts-based research is so revolutionary in the sense, because our traditional ideas about research privilege thinking, what Jung calls the thinking function, thinking and judging, and this includes the ethical function. There's a certain amount of feeling and valuing in social science qualitative research, but there's little that values sensation and intuition. Jungian James Hillman proposed, if you like, 4 dynamic psychological principles, personifying in that aspects of the psyche can present themselves as persons. It's like dreaming of people. Pathologizing, we break down. Psychologizing is a sense that we can see these things as psychological processes, and dehumanizing, which is a very interesting idea alongside the Anthropocene, because dehumanizing is not seeing humans as the center of the universe. Now, those genres are my suggestion of how these psychological principles connect to the world of art. Personifying is related to the lyric, pathologizing tragedy, psychologizing comedy, and dehumanizing epic. Next slide, please. Okay, now if you click that, click again, Justine. Great. So it's important to have a sense of the paradigm here, because the paradigm of the scientific method relies upon a basic way of seeing the world that is baked into our culture. And that is the subject-object split, that we are taught to see ourselves as essentially separate from each other, from the world, from nature. And the result of taking this idea too seriously is the climate emergency. And I will come back to that. Now, this paradigm has been joined by the paradigm of qualitative research, which sees the mind and person of the researcher as important in the research, unlike the scientific method, where the researcher has to somehow try to get out of the research. The paradigm of arts-based research is qualitative plus. It's not simply qualitative, because although the artist is in doing the art, is doing the research, what results is a work of art. And a work of art is not something that the artist owns in the sense of making meaning. The work of art can go into the world and make all sorts of meanings. It can go into different cultures. It will mean different things in different cultures. It can outlast the life of the artist. And we all know, and we know this if you are doing humanities, if you are doing literature, you know that we don't assume that what the author intends is the only thing that the art means. So arts-based research has this new paradigm of generating from the mind of the artist and providing a work that is its own being, its own autonomy, that if in a sense is alive because it's inspirited. Art is material, but it has a spirit in it, by which I mean it's generative of meanings. Now, material that has a spirit brings us back to alchemy, and Jungian arts-based research is a form of alchemy. So next slide, please. Okay, now if you click again, keep clicking, Justine, till I say stop. Okay, great, lovely. So you probably can see that there is a weird picture in the background here. And that this weird picture is a 17th century picture that it portrays rivers in England, and the rivers each have a feminine spirit, which tells us that this idea that goes back to pre-Christian times of the feminine spirits around water sources, that this idea actually persisted for many, many centuries. Recently, I discovered that the idea of a well maiden probably goes back to ancient Mesopotamia. It was certainly important for the Celts. And so I'm getting on to my kind of Jungian arts-based research, and it is the genre of the murder mystery. But one of the reasons why I think the genre of the murder mystery is important in the 21st century is that it's a modern version of the Grail myth, where the detective is the Grail knight. And why should we care about the Grail myth? Because the Grail myth is about healing the wasteland. And the wasteland is a mythical idea that has come back to us with horrifying immediacy in the climate emergency. The climate emergency is a modern form of the wasteland, and it is the result of the loss of the Grail if you see the Grail as the feminine symbol. Now, the feminine symbol of the Grail is likely related to the story of the Well Maidens, and the story of the Well Maidens is that patriarchy basically destroyed their relationship with the life-giving waters that connected the other world, the Celtic other world, to this world and kept the land fertile. What happened was the Well Maidens looked after the sacred waters, but a king came by with all his male knights, and instead of honouring the Well Maidens, actually raped them. And that is the cause of the wasteland. So I'm using the genre as a container, the genre of the murder mystery as a container for research into the feminine, with a particular emphasis on the climate emergency from a psychological point of view. Next slide, please. Yeah, great. Yeah, okay. Yes, please, next slide. I'm aware of time getting on. So far I've published 2 murder mysteries, both of which consider the climate emergency from the point of view of the psyche and myth and the possibility of connecting the splits. And, you know, if you think of America today, it's obvious that America is incredibly split. And so are other Western countries, but of course America has its own particular terrible splits, and they were exacerbated in the time of the last president, but they haven't gone away. In the first novel, The Sacred Well Murders, I wanted to look at how people like myself, white Western people, might connect or might have a sense of the indigenous past that we do have, but which is over 2,000 years ago. So it was looking at the Celts and the sacred waters. Now, this new book, I knew one of the things that you do when you get to when you're doing the preparation and the process for Jungian arts-based research, one of the useful things to do is to say what wants to come through, what wants to be in this work, what wants to be materialized in the art. And so when I discovered the story of John Winthrop Jr., America's colonial alchemist, that was very exciting to me. People don't know about this guy being an alchemist, and it seems that it wanted to come through into the story. But also, obviously, Winthrop Jr. brings in the question of America's relationship to the UK, which is obviously a question that is part of my own life, and the experiences of the climate emergency in terms of wildfires. And both novels are concerned with racism and white supremacists. Next slide, please. Okay. What you can see in this picture is a wildfire. So this is taken from a plane. It shows Southern California at the end of 2017. All the coloured bits are either burning or totally burnt. And you notice that there's an unburnt bit in the middle. That unburnt bit is Ojai Valley. And if you see that there is a lake at one end of the unburnt bit, just north of the lake and on the edge of the yellow is where I live. So in December 2017, my house almost burnt down. And this was, you know, the biggest wildfire that California had had forever. It's possible that fires since then have been bigger, but it was big. And this this snapshot of the progress of the fire, which grew a bit more before it finally stopped, was taken on Christmas Day 2017. And on that same day, I began the Alchemy Fire Murder. And it says the Sacred Well Murder there, and I changed that this morning. So never mind. The novel I'm presenting today was begun when the map looked like this. And it seemed quite likely that the fire would just sweep down the valley and destroy the town, which is in the middle of the valley. It didn't. The valley was saved, the town was saved. My house did not burn down, despite the fact that the fire was at the end of our road before it stopped. So next slide, please. So yeah, these were the processes, the things that I was sort of thinking about in terms of the process of writing this book, which took the best part of 5 years, and it had a lot of revisions and until it got into its final form. Here it's worth noting this image again in the background. This is really an image of what alchemy means. Alchemy, if you're wondering, can be put in this term that actually everything is connected to everything else. The alchemists believed that. In a different way to the ecologists who say everything is connected to everything else, and in a slightly different way to the quantum physicists who say everything is connected to everything else. But these three forms of knowing converge on this radical connectivity. And that's what Jungian arts-based research converges on, because things happen, synchronicities, they're often called, meanings come up that can't be rationally explained unless you are in the worldview of everything is connected to everything else. Next slide, please. And next slide. This is a bit boring, this one. And next slide. Yes, now if you click, Justine, we'll get some material here. Keep clicking, please. So what happens in this novel is, keep clicking, please, Justine, is that various historical things and my own story are alchemized into this murder mystery. So John Winthrop Jr., the alchemist, he becomes, in my story, a guy called Francis Andrew Ransom. I like the idea of having his initials be FAR. And he travels to America exactly the same as John Winthrop Jr., except he's accompanied by another alchemist called Robert Limor. And it turns out that Limor is a sort of corruption of the Moor, and that this character, Robert Limor, is an African alchemist. So clearly, if we think about being in America in 2017, this was a time when the racism and the emergence of white supremacists was very troubling and shocking. And we have in that year that president, whom I will not name, talking about quite good, fine people who were wearing Nazi insignia and chanting anti-Semitic and incredibly horrible racist things. Also in 2017, we have the Thomas wildfire that you just saw. And in the novel ends with my, if you like, my perspective on the wildfire, but from the point of view of the detectives. The detectives are hunting a scroll, an alchemy scroll. In my story, Francis Andrew Ransom and Robert Limor visit an Oxford college, hence Oxford College in the background, in the 17th century, and to copy an alchemy manuscript and take it to America. What nobody realizes till the 21st century is that they took the original and left the copy. And this matters because the original alchemy manuscript that comes from an Islamic scholar has herbs and chemicals in it that may lead to making a new medicine, an important new medicine, a new antibiotic. And so in the 21st century, everybody wants the original, but it's disappeared. And our hero, Mary Wand Walker, and her companions, Caroline and Anna, go to America to recover the original manuscript. When they discover the manuscript, before Mary can take it away, the person looking after it, who is a young British black intern, he is murdered. The scroll disappears, and there's a sort of hunt for the scroll on both sides of the Atlantic. Now, in my imagining of the story, in my intuition, I knew that racism was going to be important. And so I invented this thing called the European History Foundation, which is a front for white supremacists who are trying to change scholarship in a white racist direction. And I thought, well, you know, this is the sort of thing that could happen. things are surely not that bad. And then later I discovered that this actually did exist. And so this is an example of how intuitive research through making art can in fact be valuable. I wanted to increase the idea of a climate emergency, so I gave Los Angeles a blizzard. And then for many years, as you know, I'm always concerned with the feminine, but for many years I've been interested in Julian of Norwich, who was a feminist theologian and she wrote the first book in English by a woman. And so she doesn't officially, historically, have anything to do with alchemy, but she could have done, because she was interested in the feminine form of the divine, and so is alchemy. So I made her a co-founder of an Oxford college, because Oxford needs more feminine in its history. St Edmund's Hall, an actual Oxford college, becomes St Julian's College. And the alchemy scroll is more historical than you'd think, because the Ripley scroll is an actual historical alchemy scroll. There's about 20 copies in existence. One of them is in a Los Angeles museum, just as my missing alchemy scroll is. Let's move on, Justine, thank you. So, alchemy and the climate emergency. I'm not going to say too much about this, except alchemy is a way of working with nature that respects the forces of nature. It's a dialogical process. The climate emergency, our modern wasteland, is caused by many things, but one of them is definitely treating nature as a dead resource for human exploitation, with the implicit, with so much unconsciousness that the idea that that might be a problem for us because we are actually part of nature, this idea is not being in the dominant culture. And of course, the climate emergency is going to be more and more important. So there is that context of alchemy and the climate emergency in the story, not least because of the characters ending up having to escape the wildfire. So next slide. So as I said, I wanted to show a connection between alchemy and indigenous spirituality, or rather I wanted to posit a connection that could have been made and wasn't, that there is an alternative origin story that in a path not followed. That is what you can see here is, of course, Native American. That mandala figure is also very reminiscent of alchemy, some aspects of alchemy and mandalas in alchemy. Next slide. So if you click, we should get a bit more. What you can see in the background is part of the Ripley scroll. Yes, keep clicking, Justine. We're almost done. I wanted to show, really, as a final point here, that, and this is very relevant for this seminar being called Narratives, that alchemy is also a way of seeing narrative. So what you see on the left is the first 13 chapters, and you can see that they are divided by alchemy processes. So we begin with prima materia, which is the starting point, and then an alchemy stage is massa confusia. It's all confused. An alchemy stage is solutio, things dissolve together. An alchemy stage is putrefatio, things die and go rotten. C.G. Jung lists 12 alchemy stages, and there isn't a particular set order. All of them can be seen as narrative processes, and so the actual novel becomes an alchemy narrative process. I think we can stop there. So if you can stop sharing your screen if you like, Justine, and thanks very much for doing this.